Welcome to the Teaching Troubled Hearts podcast. Join us today as teacher Michelle Bickhouse expands on and gives new insight into her Teaching Troubled Hearts blog in our podcast and webinar series for educators. Today, Michelle welcomes Chaddock High School Assistant Principal Katelyn Kegaly as they discuss the value of relationships in a classroom setting.
Welcome to Teaching Troubled Hearts, and today's topic is the value of relationships. And I am here with Katelyn Kegaly. Katelyn, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Katelyn, why don't you go ahead and explain your role here at Chaddock, your background, how long you've been here.
Absolutely. Michelle said, I am Katelyn Kegaly. I am the assistant principal that oversees our high school program here. I just finished my second year with the administration team and going on 13 years of being in the field. I was a school social worker before, always been in alternative education. It's a little bit about always kind of working with this population.
Right, and that's really where your heart is. Mm-hmm. We've talked about that before, and you've said, I would never go to the public education system, so we're lucky to have you.
Well, thanks.
Okay, so we're talking about relationships, and what does the term relationship mean to you?
I think the term in relationship, I think it's got two meanings. Really, how it applies to us within our building and with our program and with our students is really kind of what is important. Because I think the term relationships just building that bond, having that trust, and that open communication with not only your parents and your students, but also your team as well.
Right, exactly. And the trust is super important. And that's not going to come outside of an authentic relationship, right? Right, okay. So how do relationships factor in the work that you do in education? Okay, we touched on this already, but can you go a little deeper with that?
I think relationships, really kind of, with our population, trust is such a big one, and I think that's the one that I think you can't really necessarily highlight enough within our population, because the majority of that, by the time they reach, us in the education field, is school itself is difficult. They've had negative feelings, whether it be towards peers or teachers or just school and the work that comes with it in general. So I think if you can build and establish that level of trust, you're going to get more out of them, relationship-wise, both academically and social-emotionally.
Right. And you also talked about working with the families. So often these kiddos come to us and their parents haven't had really good experiences, or good feeling experiences with school. And so it's really important that we not just work with the child, but to work with the family, right?
Yes.
And what are some ways that we do that here?
I think some of the ways that we do that within our own program is, one, the open door communication, whether it be through email, phone, parent contact of them coming in and just meeting with us. I think that's kind of one of the biggest ones is, our turnaround and responses when they need something and when they need us is big. But for us specifically, too, we've got, open nights where parents come and get to tour the building, they get to see us, we do meals, provide things like that, whether that be through our Christmas programs, whether that be just through our own parent nights, parent-teacher nights, conferences.
Right, great. And we do those meals and the Christmas party, really, where they get gifts and things, right?
Absolutely.
For the whole family.
For the whole family.
Not just for the students.
Not just for the students, for everybody.
Right, that's really great. That's great. All right, so how can trauma and disruptions in the attachment impact a student's ability to form relationships?
And again, when you look, I think, just at our population, their ability to establish and form those relationships with their primary caregivers is often what is disrupted. So that level of trust has not even been established within their primary source, which then makes it difficult when you kind of expand that out, teachers being included and staff being included. And so for us, it's needing to start there. It's building that trust, building that relationship with the staff members here so that you're able to kind of then be able to switch their focus into academics, which is obviously school, primarily what you think that we need to be doing, along with that social-emotional component.
Right. And so you mentioned that their primary relationships, the relationships with their caregivers, often with our students, those have been really toxic or traumatic, disruptive, causing the disruptive relationship. So we have to do special work here to overcome that huge barrier.
Absolutely.
So what kinds of things do you do personally and then with the students in the school setting? And then what kinds of things do you kind of help facilitate with the staff?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me, having the background in the school social work piece of it, that's what I did. I was the one that established the relationships and built that rapport. And I kind of think back to like the T-Barra model when I was first starting out is obviously it was there, but you really knew what it was. So you were just like, I do really good at establishing rapport with my students. that's clearly what it meant, is I was good at, developing those relationships. I think being in my administrative role, it kind of takes me one more step away from that direct impact with the students, which I think that's why I like special education too, because even though you're the administrator, that kind of is, again, that step away, you still have these relationships with the students. And I think for me, it's how am I approaching this? Most of the time when you think, I have to go to the principal's office, it's all negative. Well, it doesn't need to be, and it doesn't have to be. And it's listening to them, listening to their stories, what's happening, what's going on, how do we fix this, how do we make this better, but also at the same time, who you're having the issue with, how are we repairing that? So it's kind of going back and it's facilitating some of those conversations, even with teachers, with staff, with other peers. How are you repairing and rebuilding that relationship with them?
Right. And our students really do respond to you so well. They clearly love you. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, is it just kind of an innate gift, or can you talk to people who feel like maybe they're struggling with that ability to develop rapport? Are there words of wisdom? Are there suggestions, tips, or is it just something that comes from the heart as a combination?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it is something that just naturally comes pretty easy, just because I think I can relate to them, and I don't know if it's just because I'm so goofy and silly and kind of sometimes be like them in that sense, but I think a lot of it just comes with really just truly being able to kind of listen and to relate to them. And it's taking, what they're doing and what they're going through and understanding it as much as then it is kind of like shaping them into, okay, but how does this work into the real world? How does this work as you, now kind of transition into adulthood too, and kind of just relaying those skills with them.
Yeah, that's good. And I think it's the listening. And then you talked about you think that you're still what was your word? You're like them. You're goofy or silly. So it's sort of like talking about getting to their level, mm-hmm. not only their eye level, but you're getting to their level maybe emotionally and relationally.
I think a lot of it is just being non-judgmental with them too. Is these are things that when you think about some of the stuff that they've gone through, or that they are still going through, within their own personal lives, it's being non-judgmental as you're hearing this and accepting it. And like I said, it's not necessarily telling them and projecting my opinion of what should be right. It's kind of working through that with them and shaping them still into what a productive, young adult would be.
Exactly, and that's what we're here to do. We're here to not judge them. We're here to help them assess what's going on within them and to help work through that to reach some goals for the future, right? Mm-hmm. We touched on this really, but what are some methods that you use to develop a relationship with your students?
I think, when they come to us, our population itself just ebbs and flows throughout the year because the students are constantly coming in and out. And I think the biggest thing that we do is establishing that relationship off the bat when they come to us, whether it be, them coming down to tour, whether it be the phone conferences, phone meetings, things like that, is just putting yourself out there to meet them, to greet them. So their first impression of this is who you get, not, kind of the principal behind the door kind of a thing. And, when they're down in our ETAC classroom, obviously that's what we do when they first come with us. It's making a point to go down to introduce myself, whether it be engaging in some of those activities that our ETAC teacher does with them, and just them kind of getting to know you on that personal level as well. I think the other thing is just making yourself available. I know sometimes it doesn't always happen with things that you're doing, behind the closed doors within the offices, but I think just being in the hallways, being available, seeing them seeing you in transition times and in times of need.
Right, and I think what helps break down a lot of those barriers is eliminating that formality that you're talking about, so that they're not terrified and feeling like they're being judged. But we really here try to make it feel like home or better than home in a lot of cases. So hence in my classroom, the sofa and pillows, and in your office is set up more in a much more friendly and kind of casual atmosphere. So I think that's really important, and I think you do really well with that. All right, so what would your best piece of advice, and again, we already touched on this, but what would your best piece of advice be to other educators who are working with students that have difficulty forming these positive, healthy relationships?
I truly think, when I think, our building and our population, obviously we're smaller, so it's more conducive to be able to do that on a more intimate, one-on-one relationship status. When you think of, a gen ed setting, you're going to have 20, 30 students within a classroom, and that can be very difficult. But I think it's taking the time to individually, meet and kind of interact with some of these students, because it's going to allow for you to develop those relationships. And then in times of need, be able to use that to your benefit when they're struggling, when, something something else is going on that they're going to be able to need a little bit. You're kind of, like they say, it's filling their bucket. It's filling their bucket so that when you need it, you can kind of pull from it.
Exactly. So you have to establish those relationships in the good times, right? So that they can trust you in those difficult and challenging times. Got it. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Katelyn.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of the Teaching Troubled Hearts podcast. Visit us online at tkcchaddock.org for more from Teaching Troubled Hearts and to explore all the knowledge Center has to offer. While at tkcchaddock.org, get registered for Michelle's Teaching Troubled Hearts webinar on June 27th, where she'll further explore the importance of relationships in the classroom setting. We hope you'll join us again next time for the Teaching Troubled Hearts podcast, powered by the Knowledge Center at Chaddock.